It's slimmer, smarter, and more durable than ever before. With 8K video, Galaxy AI, and an all-day battery, the Samsung S25 FE looks like a flagship phone by all measures. But there is one big catch. The S25 FE borrows almost every single element of its design, especially on the rear, with the S24 FE, except for this matte finish, and of course the white doesn't matter. And there aren't any huge significant changes when it comes to the design profile, but there are a few. For example, the S25 FE now measures just 7.4 millimeters thin, and this trend is going to continue for the next 12 to 18 months as phones get slimmer and slimmer and slimmer. You also get on the front bezels which are only 1% smaller and thinner than on the S24 FE, but they are uneven. And for an S series device, so that is the premium Samsung range, to see uneven borders and an actual chin at the bottom is a little bit disappointing. You do have on the front gear Gorilla Glass Victus Plus, and it is IP68 dust and water resistance here as well. But talking about that display, this is a 6.7-inch LTPO AMOLED panel, and when you're using this for things like scrolling through your social media, or you're just navigating the menus, or you're just sitting down and watching content, you get a super smooth experience because it is a 120 Hz panel. So all that runs very, very well. And then when you're watching back content at peak brightness, you get 1900 nits. So using this indoors or outdoors, you're going to get a really great experience. Colors will pop, you get really good contrast, nice balances, and of course you get that now patented squiddy ink black as well in certain areas depending on the content you're watching. The panel itself is still an FHD plus resolution and not a QHD plus resolution, which is a bit of a shame, especially factor in that this costs in this particular configuration around £699. Much like as you'd expect with the S24, the S25 FE is powered by an Exynos chipset, and when it comes to performance upgrades, the upgrades are very small. The S24 FE was powered by an Exynos 2400E. The new one is powered by the Exynos 2400. Now, when you're looking at just benchmarks and a quick comparison between the two, you're getting roughly a 5% uplift in single core performance and 9% on multi-core experience. So there's not a dramatic big difference here. However, what I would say is, although this doesn't perform at the flagship level, you can do a lot of the gaming at the top end when you're playing games like Call of Duty Mobile. Great frame rates, you're just not going to top end the graphics in max on both as you would be able to on, say, a Snapdragon 8 Elite chipset like you find in the S25 series. Now, if we refer to 3D Mark's Lifestyle Extreme benchmarks, this is 20 cycles. What you have here is significant throttling under the CPU on that 2400 Exynos chipset. So what that means is you're actually going to have a breakdown in performance when it comes to taxing games that run heavily on GPU and CPU, things like Wuthering Waves, things like Genshin Impact. So factor that in. Although this carries a roughly a premium flagship spec and price, it will throttle under heavy load. Out of box, you get One UI 8.0 and Android 16 with a promise of 7 OS and security updates as well. So that is all incredible, and to be fair, Samsung is the benchmark when it comes to things like that. When you're actually using the OS itself, yes, you get a super smooth experience. Transitioning between open and closing apps is very smooth. Into multiple windows, again, very smooth, and there's tons of customization options on here, as well as a whole host of Galaxy AI features. Nothing here has changed in any way in a dramatic way as to the numerous One UI 7 videos and 8 videos you've already seen in a bunch of reviews. A couple of things to touch on though when it comes to upgrades versus the S24 FE. You're going to get a 4,900 mAh battery in the S25 FE versus 4,700 in the 24, and now you get 45 watts of wired charging on the S25 FE versus 25 on the S24 FE. All that is very, very good. However, at that $699 price point, something like an Honor 400 Pro will actually give you substantially better performance in two ways. You get a 3,300 mAh silicon carbon battery in that 400 Pro, as well as 100 watts of wired charging, and it's actually cheaper than the S25 FE. So factor that in, that is significantly better overall performing phone than the S25 FE. I believe that comes with a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 as well, which again will outperform the Exynos 2400. So factor that in, the 400 Pro sits cheaper, but overall does offer a better performance upgrade. So continuing the ongoing trend of what's exactly the same in the S24 FE versus the S25 FE, yes, it's those rear lenses. And let's quickly talk about the spec of those lenses. You get a 50 megapixel wide, 8 megapixel telephoto, 12 megapixel ultra wide across both with the same aperture, millimeter lenses, etc. Also exactly the same, as well as its capabilities. On the front, however, you do get a 12 megapixel on the S25 FE versus the 10 on the S24 FE. Now let's talk about the actual output of both as a comparison. So the main lenses, you get a great level of performance with tons of detail captured photos, great contrast and colors. They're not overly blown out or overly contrasty like you do get on some low-level Samsung devices, so that's a nice change. And then video, this can be as high as 8K 30, but we've captured it in 4K 30 to give you an understanding of how well the detail and color looks on that video. I would say it's just behind the iPhones in terms of its production and its quality, which is no mean feat, to be fair, because the iPhone is top level. Then let's look at telephoto. So 8 megapixel isn't the biggest sensor, but does a good job in capturing good overall quality. It's a step down versus the main lens, I'd say, primarily because the megapixels, and then the images itself are usable, especially even when you hit 20x zoom. But there is a lot of AI working in the background here to support that, but it looks good, not cartoony, and that's a provision I would say. Ultra wide, again, good standard, well-balanced colors and contrasts, and doesn't suffer from being overly soft around the edges, like some lower-end Samsung devices have done recently. The camera system as a whole is exactly the same, minus the front-facing sensor, as an S24 FE, but still very, very good. We'd like to see that telephoto and the ultra-wide get an upgrade, but who knows if that will happen in the near future. One thing we do want to mention in terms of social media side, we've been asked on our TikTok and our YouTube channel, and our YouTube Shorts channel, can you capture images using the, so say for example, the Instagram app versus the actual normal, and tell us if there's a difference. And there is. I would say there's about 10 to 15% difference in terms of its quality. There is some compression here, and we will continue adding in that social media aspect to all of our future phone reviews to give you an idea that if you're using social media quite heavily or at all, you want to retain the best quality, how would that look on the reviewed smartphone? The biggest issue plaguing the S25 FE is, of course, its cost. But before we give you a bit more detail, let's cover off a few more bases. Now, we're seeing a trend with Samsung at the moment, started on the S25 series at the start of the year and still going through, is upgrades tend to be very, very small. We'll deduct the fold out of this because that's a different kind of phone. They tend to be very, very small, very minor upgrades, sometimes just aesthetics and a chipset upgrade, maybe some battery upgrades at the most. That's all you're going to get. And it's a shame because I would have thought this would have been a bigger upgrade versus the S24 FE. However, let's preface it this way. This phone costs around $699, and we've already mentioned in this review as well, and that's for the 8GB 256, that we've already mentioned in this review. If you compare it to something like the Honor 400 Pro, you get a 12GB 512 storage for the same price. It has faster charging, better processor, larger battery. All those components are better on the Honor 400 Pro versus the S25 FE. So is the S25 FE a dud? Is it a flop? Are you looking to just avoid this at all costs? No, I wouldn't say that's the case at all. I think there's a lot of greatness going on here. The main lens does a really good job. Charging speeds, although not as fast as the Honor 400 Pro, are still very good. Battery life is very good. And you get really long-term support in terms of the OS and One UI as well. So it's a really good buy if you're looking to get a new phone around that $699 price point. However, if it was me, I would be cautious and shop around to see what you can get, possibly less than this, that will perform better, like the Honor 400 Pro. But let us know in the comment section below your thoughts on the Samsung S25 FE, and is it a better phone than the Honor 400 Pro, which you'd buy? Let us know in the comment section. Until the next one, as always, we out.